Okay, today's lecture, part 4 of the Gilded Age, is going to be the Great American Frontier. Farmers, natives, cowboys, and populists. So that's who we're going to be talking about today on the Great American Frontier. Cowboys, farmers, natives, and populists. Now, when you think of the frontier, folks, what are we talking about? When you think of the word frontier, what area? West. And what does it look like when you think of the frontier? Maybe plains. Do you see like buildings? Do you see? It's like maybe not necessarily abandoned, because abandoned is like there's a building and there's no one living there anymore. But more like not necessarily barren either, but uncivilized, untouched, right? Almost that pristine nature of some sort. So in America at this time, we've expanded along the East Coast. We've gotten all the way across to California. But we have yet to expand into the interior of America. So what we're going to be talking about in this unit is the Great American Frontier. And really what we're going to be talking about is this America in the center, the Midwest even. So this is what we're talking about, folks, in the Great American Frontier. Has society arrived here yet? It's untouched, right? Who's probably here? Native Americans, whatever else. But have we started building skyscrapers? Have we started farming and taming nature here? No. So this is the area that has yet to be conquered by the American people, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. The interactions between these four groups and nature. Make sense? Okay. So the first thing we should note first is this. In 1890, Frederick Jackson Turner wrote an essay called The Significance of the Frontier on American History. The Significance of Frontier on American History. So in 1890, Frederick Jackson Turner wrote an essay called The Significance of the Frontier on American History. And based on the title alone, do you think this essay is going to be positive about the impact of the frontier or negative about the impact of the frontier? Positive. Likely positive about the impact. So here's what he said. He had two major arguments. The first argument that Frederick Jackson Turner made in The Significance of the Frontier on American History was that American society was shaped by the frontier. The first argument he made was that American society was shaped by the frontier. Again, that American society was shaped by the frontier. The argument that he made was that as a culture, we developed a sense of independence and individualism. We developed a sense of independence and individualism out on the frontier. Again, we developed a sense of independence and individualism. Why might we develop that if we're living out here or out here or out here? Why might we develop a sense of independence and individualism if I took you and I said, go live here? Why might you develop a sense of independence and individualism? Yeah, there's not a lot of people around, and so if you're going to survive, you have to rely on yourself. And so we learned this sense of independence. We learned this sense of individualism. I need to take care of myself because, yeah, there's other farmers, but are they living right next door to me? No. They might be living a mile away, 2 miles away. Land is open, and so you have to take care of yourself. This impact also argued that the frontier was the great equalizer. It argued that the frontier was the great equalizer. The frontier was the great equalizer when it came to class, gender, race. It was the great equalizer when it came to class, gender, and race. Think about it, folks. Does Mother Nature care if you're rich or poor? No. Does Mother Nature care if you're white or black? Or a man or a woman? No. Mother Nature is going to be cruel. Mother Nature is going to be hard. And Mother Nature is going to take everything from you. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. So on the frontier is pretty much everyone on the same playing field. And so if there was a rich man living next to a poor man, likely they would have the same experience. So it was the great equalizer. So it also promoted political and social equality. Because it was the great equalizer, living on the frontier promoted the sense of political and social equality. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, he was a large plantation owner, right? But he fought for the common man because he likely had a similar experience to small farmers than a wealthy banker would have to a factory worker. Does that make sense? So the idea is that it was a great equalizer. It promoted American inventiveness. The frontier also promoted American inventiveness. American inventiveness. Suppose I took you and said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and blindfold you. I'm going to put you in the middle of this barren frontier. Survive for 7 days. Good luck. Are you just going to fall over and die? No, you're going to figure out how to build shelter. And you're like, these trees would be sufficient for building a boat maybe. And maybe I can pick berries, and maybe I'll build a ladder and whatever else. And so you would be inventive because you had to survive. And I'm giving you 7 days. The Americans, they were given all of eternity to say, hey, you make this work. So they figured it out. And lastly, in shaping the American frontier, shaping American society, the frontier gave Americans a second chance. It gave us a second chance. I mean, why were so many people from Europe coming to America? Jobs, because were they making it back in their home country? Nope. They were looking for a second chance. Suppose you failed in the cities. Where might you turn? To the frontier for a second chance. And so this is what the frontier represented to American society. But the frontier served another purpose. The second part of his thesis then is this. One, it shaped American society. But two, it played a more pivotal role. The American frontier served as a safety valve It served as a safety valve for the problems of the cities. It served as a safety valve for the problems of the cities. Let me explain. Suppose this water bottle I hold in my hand represents a city. Okay, it's filled with a little bit of water. Can this water bottle sufficiently hold all this water that's currently inside of it right now? Mm-hmm. Sure. But suppose I stuck a hose underneath this water bottle and I began to fill it more and more and more with water, and I kept on filling it up even though it was full. Eventually, what's going to happen to this water bottle? It's going to blow up. It's going to explode. The same is true of the cities. Were the cities getting crowded? Mm-hmm. Crowded, dirty, polluted, crime was going up, disease, whatever else. And so these cities might have imploded on itself. They might have just collapsed underneath the pressure of all that population. But the frontier served as a safety valve, so that when we turn the cap on the top of this water bottle, if we keep filling this up with water, what's going to happen to that water? It'll eventually flow out into the frontier. It's going to enter this unknown area, but is this water bottle going to explode? No, all the excess will now flow out into the frontier, and that's what the frontier served for the cities. All that excess population, all those excess problems, we can spill them out over to the frontier. Because look at this city right here in this image here. You have all these people living here, but once it gets too crowded, where can they go? They can go here. Start their own farm. Start their own city. And they can keep doing that so long as communities get crowded. Does that make sense to everyone? Mm-hmm. So that's the safety valve thesis. The argument is, again, that it served as a safety valve, and it was a place for people to go when the cities got overcrowded and problematic. Now, here's the problem, though. In 1890, the frontier closed. What does that mean? That the frontier closed. When we say that this great American frontier was closed by 1890. What does that mean? We pretty much discovered everything. There wasn't any land really left to say, oh, we haven't touched that yet. So the frontier closed in 1890, and there's a concern that now that the frontier is closed, what's going to happen to the problems of the city? The overpopulation might be a concern, whatever else. So again, in 1890, the frontier closed, and the last part to be closed, folks, is we discovered all of this, and this, and this, and this, and this. What's the last place to be discovered that we supposedly, or we had intended to set aside for someone else? Oklahoma. So in 1890, because we ran out of space, we began to start exploring Oklahoma. Now, if you remember, folks, Oklahoma was supposed to be set aside for who? Native Americans. Remember how we promised, like, hey, we're going to go ahead and give you Oklahoma because we feel really bad about taking your land. I know George Washington promised you could keep your land, but we took that from you too. But I promise this time, we're going to take some of your land, but whatever you have left, you can keep it forever. Promise this time. We're not going to keep that promise. But that's what happened. So now we start taking over the land in Oklahoma because that's all the frontier that's left. Questions so far? None? Okay. So let's talk about Native Americans. It's been a while since we talked about Native Americans. Well, Native Americans are not doing well. Because the Native Americans were all forced to live in one territory, many of them are suffering from disease, poverty, whatever else. Well, they're suffering, but do we still want their land? Sure. So what America decides is, hey, Native Americans, I know that we promised you Oklahoma, but we kind of need that land. So here's what we're going to do. We told you we're going to give you all of Oklahoma. Instead, I think you're going to like this idea, our new U.S. Indian policy is going to be that instead of giving you this entire state, which is a lot, I think, for you, instead, we're going to go ahead and force all of your people on tiny Indian reservations, where this piece of land is going to be reserved for you. So the new U.S. Indian policy is to force Native Americans onto federal Indian reservations. Now, here's a good idea that America's saying is, look, from now on, though, the nice thing about these reservations is these are yours. We're not going to take them away again. And I know I've said that like twice already, but this time I mean it. You really get to keep the land this time. So we forced Native Americans onto these Indian reservations. By the way, this is the only time that this joke makes any sense, so I'm just going to tell it right now. What do you call it when you when you're hesitating about setting aside some time to visit Indian land?
Reservation.
So what do you call it when you're hesitant about setting aside some time on Indian land? A reservation. Because you're having a reservation about your reservation on a reservation. Right? Homonyms. Because again, it's a reservation, like you're hesitant about reserving time on an Indian reservation. So there's very few opportunities in life where you can tell that joke. This is one of them. But a reservation. That's right. Language is awesome. Anyway, the federal Indian reservation policy, though, was a bit detrimental. It was bad for Indian culture. Why might it be bad for Indian culture, for the cultures of Indians, to say, hey, your people have to live only here from now on. You have to stay in this one box. why might it be problematic for some Native American cultures to be told, you have to live only here now? Why is that going to be problematic for some Native Americans?
They used to live like all over the place.
Why did they used to live all over the place?
Because it was their land first.
It was their land first, but there was a reason. Huh?
There was different tribes.
Different tribes, definitely a part of it. But think about their way of life, folks, for some of these Native Americans. Why might it be difficult to say, hey, from now on, you live only here? They used to
Do things like hunting and stuff.
They used to hunt. What do you call that when you have groups of people that are constantly moving? They were nomadic. So pretty much, folks, it hurt the Native American way of life in terms of their nomadism. Or the fact that they were nomadic. Was that a really critical component of their lifestyle for many of them? That was what they were. They were a nomadic tribe. That's why they had these teepee huts. Why?
So you can pull it up like after you're done.
Yeah, so you can constantly move. It was what they did for hundreds of thousands of years. And now we're telling them, you can't do that anymore. And is it going to be difficult for them if by the way, what are they hunting? Buffalo or bison. If the buffalo comes by, they can chase it, but once it leaves, they're like, oh, come back. We're not allowed to leave. Why don't you just, move around here, buffalo, just like in circles. But that's not what's going to happen. And so that really does destroy their way of life. It really does change them. But America said, oh, don't worry about it, though. I mean, I know you really want to hunt the buffalo, but there's really no point because we've driven the buffalo nearly to extinction anyway. Because, folks, we killed the buffalo. The U.S. people nearly drove the buffalo to extinction. Why? Well, the major reason why the U.S. population drove the buffalo to near extinction is that we used it to feed railroad workers. When we were building all those transcontinental railroads, we had to feed our workers, so we murdered all the buffalo. Other times, we killed buffalo for amusement. Here, folks, is an image. What would happen is that if you're riding on a train, oftentimes as you're traveling across the country, you would point your gun out your window and you would just shoot buffalo because you were bored. And this happened all the time. And there were so many buffalo at the time, you couldn't miss. So you would just shoot buffalo, and you wouldn't stop the train and go get them. You would just shoot buffalo as you're traveling across the country. That's what people did. These two images, folks. This is a mountain of buffalo hides. This is a mountain of buffalo skulls.
What are the skulls used for?
Nothing. They're just remnants. In terms of numbers, folks, in 1800, there were 65 million buffalo. By 1870, there were 1,000 left. By 1900, there were 100. That's right, folks. In 100 years, just to give you an idea of the impact of American civilization on the environment, in 100 years, we killed 65 million buffalo. In 100 years, we killed 65 million buffalo in just 100 years. Well, because we drove that population down to about 100, what we ended up doing was we put those buffalo where? Like breeding, wildlife refugees, wherever else, and we began to rebuild the population. So today, we're at about 260,000 buffalo. Is that anywhere close to what we were before? No, not at all. But also keep in mind, why can't we have 65 million buffalo in America anymore? Yeah, there's like civilization and towns and communities and ski resorts and whatever else. So we can't just have buffalo roaming around. But anyway, folks, is this going to be bad for Native Americans? What did they rely on the buffalo for? Hides, clothing, food, shelter, their wings. Right? Fun fact. Buffalo wings don't come from buffalo. They're chicken. Just if you got confused at all. Well, buffalo wings come from chicken. They're called buffalo wings because they're from Buffalo. That's where they first came from. Anyway. Good? Got it. So, have we mistreated Native Americans? Most definitely. By the way, here are some other statistics. These are many, not all, but many of the Native American tribes in America before the Europeans got here. Again, there's much smaller tribes as well, so don't assume this is the entirety of it. But as the Europeans got here, they lost this land, then they lost this land, and then they lost this land. And today, folks, this is all that remains of Native American reservations. It's a huge difference from this to this. So this is what exists today. Clearly, some mistreatment going on here. And so, in 1881, a woman by the name of Helen Hunt Jackson wrote a book called A Century of Dishonor. In 1881, a woman by the name of Helen Hunt Jackson wrote a book called A Century of Dishonor. And this was a book about the government. And what do you think the thesis of this book was? That the government what?
Dishonor.
Yeah. The government lied and mistreated. Sorry, they mistreated and lied to Native Americans. The government mistreated and lied to Native Americans. Okay, we broke our promises. We mistreated them. We took advantage of them. But A Century of Dishonor is about the mistreatment and lies of the U.S. government to Native Americans. She felt bad for these people. They said, look, these noble people, we're killing them off. They're dying of disease. They're literally dying because of us. And did she want them to die? No, she cared about these people. She said, we should be ashamed of ourselves as a people. And so she wanted to save them. So she said, the only way to save these Native Americans is to get rid of their culture and force them to become Americans. The only way to save them is to get rid of their culture and force them to assimilate. Again, the only way to save them is to force them to get rid of their culture and get them to assimilate. Now, how many of you were expecting that? Probably not, right? Most of you were like, I thought it'd be something like, let's help them out. But some of you were like, well, yeah, that's what we tend to do. You expected maybe we would help them out. But no, they said we had to force them to get rid of their culture and then convince them to assimilate. Because she didn't care about their culture so much, but she did care about what? Their livelihoods. So she said, look, I want to save them. I don't care about their culture, but I want to save these people. And the only way to save these people is to make them American. Because if you continue to be Native American, we'll kill you. And I don't want to, but those people do. Because you're just too different. But if you become like us, if you change the way you speak, talk, live your life, you might survive here. So, we began to open up Carlisle schools, which were boarding schools for Native Americans. And pretty much at these Carlisle schools, which were boarding schools for Native Americans, we would segregate Native American children from their tribes. We'd pull them out of their tribes and put them in these schools. So we'd pull them out of their tribes, segregate children from their tribes, and force them into schools. And we'd force them to learn English and American culture. We would beat them if they spoke their home language. We would beat them if they dressed the way they used to. We would beat them if they prayed to the old gods. We would beat them if they did anything that wasn't American. But we did it for them. But we thought so. I mean, as crazy as we look at that now, did these people genuinely believe that they were trying to help these people? Like what? Look, I know you want to believe in your gods, but he's the wrong God. There is only one true God. And your culture, that's great, but you know what? You know what's going to happen if you continue to practicing your culture? They're going to kill you. So come to our side. And so they would beat them. They would force them to learn English and force them to learn American culture. This is really bad for Native American cultures, though. Because our Native American cultures, are a lot of them written histories? No, they're what kind of histories? They're oral histories. And so if your children are not being taught your oral history, what's going to happen? You're going to lose your culture. And actually, the Carlisle schools are credited for the loss of millions of stories. Languages of Native Americans that have died out completely because their children were never taught to speak the language. And so there are many languages that were spoken that will never be spoken again because of the Carlisle school. There's actually an interesting story about there's these two very, very elderly people in Mexico. They're the last two people that can speak this Native American language, and they don't like each other. So we can't get them to talk to each other and have a conversation. So they'll tell us words periodically, but we can't get them to have a conversation so we can record it. So because of their animosity, even though we've explained to them, look, you're the only two left, this language is going to die if you guys don't have a conversation. They just don't like each other. So it's a shame. I forget the reason why they don't like each other. They just don't. They don't like each other a lot, so it's kind of a problem. But anyway. Another way that we're going to go ahead and deal with Native Americans is we passed something called the Dawes Severalty Act. The Dawes Severalty Act. And the Dawes Severalty Act was another way to deal with Native Americans. And what we did with the Dawes Severalty Act is that we ended tribal ownership of land. The Dawes Severalty Act ended tribal ownership of land. Because, folks, if you lived on a Native American tribe, who owned the teepee that you were living in at the moment? Who owned it? The tribe, which means who owned it? Everyone owned it. Imagine if you had tribal ownership of your street. So you go home one day, but you decide to sleep at your neighbor's house. Because you can. Because you all own that. So today you're going to sleep at your neighbor's house. The next night you're going to sleep at another neighbor's house. Next night you're going to go into your neighbor's fridge and see what they have for dinner. And then the other night you're going to sleep in your own house. But it's not actually your house. We only say that because of the conventions of American culture today. But in tribal ownership of land, there is no your house. It's just ours. This is really true because if you think about it, this is kind of how American culture works. We wanted to end this tribal ownership of land. And once we divided up the land, we were going to sell it back to individuals. So we were going to divide the land or end tribal ownership of land and sell it back to individuals. They wanted to sell the land back to individual people versus having tribal ownership of land. Individual Indians, individual families. Now, to be fair, not all the land was sold to Native Americans. They sold it to railroads, and rich companies, and whatever else. So not the most ideal. But again, they sold the land back to the Native Americans individually. And the point behind this is this. The American government felt that they had to individualize to civilize. They felt that they had to individualize to civilize. So that's the Dawes Severalty Act, the idea of individualizing the land to civilize them. Yes?
What did you say? Thought they had to individualize?
The U.S. government thought they had to individualize to civilize. I mean, if you think of American or European culture today, folks, we're very much individual, right? Think about how you eat. If you go to, let's say, Applebee's or wherever you go for a restaurant, You eat and you order your own dish, right? This is my plate. That's your food. This is my food. You don't eat off my plate. This is mine. This is my placemat. You can only have some of my food if you get my permission. Do not touch my food. That's how we are, right? But in communal cultures, again, I grew up here in America, but when I started eating with other families, I guess I grew up a little bit communal also, but when I started going out to dinner with my family and friends and whatever else later on, and you go to restaurants that was like family style, like Chinese food is oftentimes family style, there's 9 people at the table, and there's like 8 dumplings on the plate. You're like, wait, there's only 9 and 8. How do we divide it? You can't have 2 because that's not fair. And so a lot of us get all bent out of shape because we're so used to private property that this notion of communal ownership of food, communal ownership of land, it really does get us bent out of shape. Sharing. You learn to share in the beginning, but eventually you don't share. You don't share as an adult. Hey, can I borrow your car? No. That's my car. Where's your car? Why don't you have a car? So, we're trying to force that individualism on them. And folks, it's been forced on you. This is your desk. You sit here. This is where you belong. If you come into class one day, someone's sitting in your seat like, hey, why are you in my seat? Yeah. At which point you could argue, I'm sorry, why is this your seat? In Japanese culture, folks, while there are assigned seats, students don't go from class to class. Teachers go from class to class, and this is your classroom. But the students are also responsible for cleaning the classroom. Which is not that big, but like you throw out the trash, you clean the whiteboards, you do all those things, but it's your class. And then the teachers, they're the ones who roam from classroom to classroom to classroom. So that's a sense of communal ownership though, right? You don't have that here. This is your desk for right now, but that's yours. Not we all own this. There's no communal responsibility. In any case, in order to promote this idea of individualism though, the Americans held a carrot to the natives. And they said, look, to get you to buy into this plan, here's what we're going to do. If you stay on your land for 25 years, if you stay on your land for 25 years, and you don't move, but you stay on your land for 25 years, what will I as the U.S. government give you? Not land. You've already bought the land. You've already bought the land. The land is yours. What will I give you that you really want that you don't have at the moment? The vote. I will make you a U.S. citizen. Because Native Americans, folks, are not U.S. citizens at the time. So they said, if you stay on the land for 25 years and you don't leave, I will make you a U.S. citizen and give you the right to vote. And for someone that's being governed by a body that they have no voice in, is this kind of a big deal. Because they have no say in the U.S. government up until this point. So I'm telling you now, if you want to stay in the government, don't move for 25 years. You stay on your land. Why were they trying to do that, though, folks? What were they hoping to get out of them by making them stay in one place for 25 years? What part of their culture do they want to die? That nomadic culture, right? Again, they're still used to moving, but I said, you have a choice. You can move around and follow the buffalo, or you can stay right here. And if you stay here, you get citizenship. Make sense? Anyway, folks, did Native Americans like any of this?
No.
No, many of them were forced into it. Many of them resisted, and so let's talk about Native American resistance. The biggest form of Native American resistance, folks, was the ghost dance movement. The ghost dance movement is when Native Americans called upon their ancestors to give them strength to take back their land. The ghost dance movement. It was when they called upon their ancestors to give them strength to take back their land. It's like, I call upon my ancestors. And I asked for my father, my father's father, my father's father's father to give me strength to reclaim my land so that I would have the strength of 20 men to fight against the Americans. By the way, the term Native American, Indian is already a wrong term, right? But Native American is not that much better. Why not?
Because they were
Why aren't they American? Yeah, where does the term American come from? Is that a Native American term? No, that's a European term that they gave to America. They didn't call this America back then.
What do you call it, Latin?
No, they had their own Native American terms for it. And so to suggest that they are Native American, that's also kind of insulting. Because they're not American. They're not European in nature. So a more appropriate term today, folks, is the indigenous people. Indigenous just means the people that were here first. So if you want to be really politically correct, indigenous people. But the problem with indigenous people is that assumes that they're all indigenous people and that they're all the same person. That's like saying, hey, all of you Latinos, are you all Mexican? No. But saying indigenous people is also a little bit like, whoa, why are you assuming that all Native Americans or indigenous people are the same? We're not. So the more appropriate is like, how Native Americans, like in this area, they call them Gabrielinos. That's also wrong. Because the Gabrielinos were the name that the Spanish gave the Native Americans here. So if you want to be really, really appropriate, call them by their tribal names. In this area, it was the Tongva. The Tongva. Tongva tribe. But again, all these things, what's politically correct, what's not, it just depends, sort of. But anyway, good there? So, they fought back in the ghost dance movement. The Americans get really, really concerned. And so there's some battle between the Americans and the Native Americans. But eventually the ghost dance movement ends with the Battle of Wounded Knee. The Battle of Wounded Knee ends the ghost dance movement. And it ends the ghost dance movement when American soldiers kill 200 innocent Native Americans. The story is that they surrounded this group, I think it was the Sioux Indians. They surrounded this tribe finally that were rebelling, and they surrendered. We surrounded them, and one of the American soldiers accidentally opened fire, and a cannonball struck the crowd. And assuming that the Native Americans were fighting back, other Americans opened fire, and they killed over 200 Native Americans innocently.
Why does that happen a lot? Like someone accidents.
Well, accidents happen. Accidents do genuinely happen. Other times, people do it and they say it's an accident. But we don't talk about the times when accidents don't happen, right? So, does it happen as often as we think? No, but we only talk about it when it doesn't happen. Because we don't talk about all the times where things were fine. We only talk about things when they're bad. Right? You look at crime on the news, you only find out, the news only talks about when things are bad. The news is like, things were fine today. Like, you don't hear that report. There was no crime today in Los Angeles. That news report just never happens. They only report about the bad things. And so that's kind of how history tells itself. If it's out of the status quo, you talk about it because you expect everything else to be fine, but then you take for granted when it's fine. So let's talk about the cattle frontier.
What year did Native American resistance start?
1890. Anyway, cattle frontier. Something you should know about cattle. Something I learned about cattle, actually. Cattle are animals that look like this that you eat. Cows are for what? Milk. Yeah, I didn't know that. Apparently cattle are for... You don't eat cows. You eat cattle. Cows are for milk. So like you have like cow farms, they're not gonna kill the milk cows for meat. They're gonna use them for milk. But the cattle, they're pretty much the same thing. There's different breeds of cows and whatever else. But anyway, here's what happened. Most of these cows or cattle originated in Texas. Okay, most of these cows or cattle originated in Texas. And what would happen is because all the cows are in Texas, we have to get all these cows and we have to put them on the long drive. It's called the long drive. And the long drive is to get these cows from Texas all the way up to these cow towns further north. Now you tell me, folks, looking at this map, why do we have to take these cows from Texas and take them on the long drive up to cow towns?
To turn into food?
Yes, but why can't we turn them to food in Texas? Look at the map, folks. Because all the railroads are up by these cow towns. So we take them to places like Abilene, Kansas, and then we slaughter the cows, and then what do? We ship them off to Los Angeles, New York, Chicago. Does that make sense? So why can't we do it down here in Texas? There's no railroads yet. There will be eventually, but not yet. And so because of the lack of railroads early on, we had to take these cows and walk them through dangerous Native American territory up into these cow towns. Now, who did this? Whose job was it to take these cows from Texas to the cow towns? Cowboys. Let's talk about the cowboy. A few facts about cowboys. You know that iconic American figures you guys think about as the cowboy? That guy's Mexican. Because the cowboy is not American in nature. The cowboy is actually stolen from the Mexican vaquero. Right? In fact, you guys know the word buckaroo, like, howdy, buckaroo. It's like a term they use in the Wild West. Buckaroo is an English bastardization of the word vaquero. Yeah, buckaroo is vaquero. It is mispronounced it over time, but vaquero is a cowboy. They call him buckaroo. Also, all the things that are cowboy, like broncos, you ride that bronco. Broncos from the word bronco caballo. Right, like that horse, that Spanish word for like that horse that's like always bucking and like fighting. And then we wear like chaps, like those like leather chaps to prevent us from like getting burnt. Some of the Spanish word chapareras. Beef jerky, all the cowboys eating beef jerky, that's charqui. Yeah. And so this American idea of cowboys are not indigenous to America. They're all Mexican. They're all Mexican things. So again, you're a cowboy. It's Mexican. See? Mexican vaqueros. There's your cowboy. Also, something else to kind of ruin your images of cowboys. You know when you go to the store and you buy like a cowboy hat, like a Stetson hat? Cowboys never bought hats like that. Cowboys, like real cowboys, they never bought Stetson hats. They would buy those round hats. And what would happen, they would buy hats like that. Like normal whatever hats. What would happen over time was that these cowboys would use their hats so much, they'd drop them on the floor when they're wrangling cows, or they'd throw them on the ground when they go to bed at night. That would dent the cap in, so the top of the hat would eventually be pushed in. And because they're constantly taking their hat off to dry off their sweat, or taking their hat off to greet people, or just when they take it off, they pinch the front. Eventually, over time, all cowboy hats, by nature and experience, took the shape of today's modern cowboy hat. But that hat was not created by a hat maker. That cowboy hat was created through experience of real cowboys. And so when city slickers like us that wanted to buy a cowboy. Like, where do I buy a hat like that? You couldn't back then. So a guy named Stetson said, I want to have that look of a cowboy. So he began to make hats that look like they were worn and used and you were an experienced cowboy already. So the cowboy hat of today gives you the impression you've been using it for a while now, and that's why they were sold back then, to make it seem like you're a veteran cowboy, when in reality, cowboys wore just regular rounded tops. I know. Bursting bubbles left and right.
Awesome.
Also, most cowboys were not white. Most cowboys, folks, were black or Mexican. Here's why, folks. Being a cowboy was not an easy life. It was very difficult to be a cowboy at the time. Many cowboys got paid as little as $1 a day.
$1 a day?
$1 a day. And this is when you're working 24 hours a day. Right? When at the end of the day, when you're done and you're tired, do you get to go home? No, you have to sleep next to the cows. And let me explain the dangers that go along with being a cowboy. Number one, you have to deal with, baby cows and old cows and bulls that are wild. If your cow is trying to run away, you have to go ahead and make sure you catch that cow. If a cow is giving birth, you have to make sure you help that cow give birth. That's your job. It's going to be you and all these cows, and you need to make sure that, they don't start stampeding because you're responsible for all those cows. That's you and maybe your one other friend to make sure they don't get hit by trains when you're crossing across the plains. That's you. And these are all your cows.
There's only one person.
Usually 1, 2, maybe up to 3 people for like 500 cows. You have to worry about cattle wranglers, where you might be sleeping, and cattle wranglers are people that would steal cows. No? So let's say you'd go to bed one night and you'd wake up dead. Right? Because they got you in your sleep, so you'd be dead when you woke up. So that's a problem. So then you might be killed by cattle wranglers. If there's a lightning storm, your cows might start stampeding and kill you. If there's a lightning storm also, like your cows have to they might go crazy and run over cliffs because they all just jump over. You have to get your cows across rivers. I mean, it's problematic. So for $1 a day, it's not an easy life. And most of the money goes to the white cattle ranchers anyway. They're the ones who make all the money. You get very little. Does that make sense, folks? By the way, you can still go on vacation on these cattle drives today. Has anyone ever seen the movie City Slickers?
No.
Great movie. Billy Crystal. You should watch it. But anyway, these guys that live in New York decide for their 50th birthday, they're going to become cowboys for the weekend, for 7 days, and go on a cattle drive. I want to do that. That seems cool. I'll do that one day. But anyway. They eventually take them to a cow town, at which point, what do they do with the cows? They slaughter them. And this is hard for some cowboys because they grow attached to certain cows. They're like, bye, Norman. And the cow's going to die, so it's sad. Let's talk about farming. So we talked about Native Americans. We've talked about cowboys. Let's talk about farming. Farming will take the last, pretty much, brunt of this unit today. So farming. Allow me to explain. Were a lot of people, quiet down folks, were a lot of people living in the farms out west early on in America? No. So we had to get people to move there. So what we did is that eventually, in 1862, good old Abe Lincoln passed a law called the Homestead Act of 1862. And what the Homestead Act of 1862 did was that it sold 160 acres of land to families. It sold 160 acres of land to families for the low, low price of $30. That is not bad. That's like a month's worth of work. Now, would you be willing to save up a month's worth of work to buy a quarter the size of La Puente? I sure would. By the way, you know that the area that we're living on was an original homestead by the Workman and Temple family, right? Yeah. Anyway, so they'd buy this land for $30, and over 500,000 families moved out west. So they bought the land for $30, and over 500,000 families said, yeah, I'll do that. Now, why did the government sell the land so cheap? How would the government benefit from all these families moving out west? We'll expand the country. Might we grow more food? Would the economy benefit from these people moving out west? Definitely. So there's a lot of governmental benefits. Like, let's say we want to colonize the moon one day. Would the government charge like millions of dollars to get you to go to the moon? No, they'd probably make it super cheap. Like, we'll pay for you to go to the moon. Because is it going to suck on the moon the first few decades? Yeah, it's going to be terrible. Yeah, you're on the moon, but that kind of wears off after like the first month or so when you realize, oh, there's no Disneyland here. There's nothing to do but live in this for the remainder of my life. I regret my decision. So there's that. I still want to go, though. I still want to go to the moon one day. Anyway, so they start moving. Again, they start moving out west. Here they are moving out west. And again, once the frontier closed, folks, did people still move out west? Definitely, right? We began moving out west still. Here they are selling land. Here's an example of a woman living out on a homestead. Pretty hardcore, am I right? Yeah. I like to think that this woman is defending her children, saying, come and get some. And she has that knife out, like... Yeah, she's like, you won't take us alive. I think she also has a gun in that bouquet. Like, smell the roses, and like, bah! There's also a cat in the picture. See? Cat. Here's my question, though. Let's use some analytical skills. Why is her homestead here? Water. Access to water. Right, that's really the important part. Why is she living here? Because of the water. So, her house is very nice, actually. But most people that lived out west lived in SodHouses. Interesting. A sod house was a house made out of sod bricks, or pretty much made out of what? Dirt. Mud. Dirt, really. Because what's the problem with living out west? What is there not a lot of in the Midwest? Trees. There's no wood to build a house. So you would get on your wagon, you'd travel out west. Once you got to your plot of land, you'd take apart your wagon and build the frame of your home. Or, let's say you didn't have a wagon, you took a train. You'd take your train out, you'd open up your Sears catalog, which existed back, the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and you'd order wood from the Sears catalog. The train would deliver it, and you had to go pick it up from the train station, then lug it back to your plot of land, so you had a place to start building your house. Huh? No, Sears catalog. Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward were the first two mail-order catalogs. And they serviced a lot of farms. So Macy's was one of the first department stores. Sears is a department store today, but originally it was a mail-order catalog. And so, like this lady, for example, she probably bought her chimney stack and her windows from the Sears catalog. Because you wouldn't have taken that with you. Once you got there, you'd see what you would need, and you would order Sears catalog. From the Sears catalog, you'd order chimney, windows, maybe a steel plow, those things. Anyway, folks, what they would then do is they would take some knives, they'd dig out bricks out of the earth, and they'd build their homes out of dirt. Here's another example of a family living out in a sod house. Eventually, the plants would grow out of your house. It's like living in the Shire if you were a hobbit. If you want that experience, it would be a little bit like this. Here's a poor version of a sod house. Here's another example of a sod house. It's a little bit nicer than the other ones. Here's a more modern example today of what that sod house would look like if it was still intact today. Anyway, folks, the problem with these sod houses, though, is it's terrible when what? It rains. Now, luckily, it doesn't rain very much here. But when it does rain, are you terrified that your house might just collapse? Yeah. True. Also, it won't protect you from the heat. It won't protect you from the cold. You're screwed if there's a tornado. I mean, really, it's a serious, serious problems. Nonetheless, let's talk about difficulties of the West. The biggest problem living out west is what? What's the biggest problem for those living out here? Look, what's the biggest problem? Not Sharknadoes. The lack of rain. The lack of rain. There's very little water out here. And so here are the difficulties of the West, folks. The lack of rain. Tough soil. So you have lack of rain. Tough soil. A lonesome life. I mean, what if you hate your family? You're kind of stuck. You know? Like, you're going to build a scarecrow and be really bored with yourself. Grasshoppers and pests. What might they do? Eat your crops. That's a problem. Also, no wood, which means you can't build what? Houses or what else? I mean, we believe in private property, so what else can't you build? You can't build fences. So no homes, fences, so no wood. And lastly, severe weather. It can get really, really hot here because it doesn't rain. But it can also get really, really cold. In fact, one of the worst recorded years in 1886 is the Children's Blizzard, when it got 68 below zero. Yeah. So is that good for your crops?
No.
No. It's not at all. So, well, for your kids. By the way, the reason why it's called Children's Blizzard, a lot of kids died. A lot of kids. What happened was that people didn't know what to do, so because the school was going to get snowed in, a lot of schools decided to send the kids home, and then the blizzard struck. And so the kids were on their way home, and like across the country, like hundreds of kids died. It's called Children's Blizzard. A lot of kids died during this blizzard. It was a freak storm that no one saw coming. Even a Doppler 9000 didn't tell us. So it doesn't exist back then. That's why.
When did that happen again?
I think 1886.
Like where all over the place?
Yeah, pretty much this general area. Anyway, by 1900, folks, things were so bad that 2/3 of all homesteads failed. By 1900, 2/3 of all homesteads failed, which means they were not doing very well. In 1900, 2/3 of all homesteads failed. To give you another statistic, specifically Kansas, by 1900, half of Kansas population left. They just said, yeah, this is too hard, screw this, and they just left Kansas. So again, half of Kansas's population left, and 2/3 of all homesteads failed. So, are these homesteads working out?
No.
No. Which is why they were so cheap, right? Because we knew these were not going to be the easiest. But, are we a country that quits? No, we have to adapt. We have to be ingenious. We have to be inventive and individualistic. So we adapted. Talk about adaptations to the West. How did we get past all of these problems? Well, first off, windmills. How did windmills help? Not electricity.
They use wind to potential energy.
Water. You dig a well into the ground or a pipe, and a windmill will constantly pump air into the ground, and then as you push air into, let's say, a pot. Let's say I put one hole here and one hole here. If I pushed air in one end, what's going to happen to the water?
It'll go to the other end.
It'll go to the other end. So that's what windmills did. As it spun, it went shh, 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 and water would come out the other end. Windmill. No, I mean, they can also be told kind of where the wind's going, but they turn to capture that wind as well. Steel plow. Why is that good?
Helps you with the tough dirt.
Tough soil helps. Also, are our crops surviving the winters here? No. So we decided to import Russian wheat. Because if this wheat can survive a Russian winter, it can survive anything. Because Russian winters are hardcore.
Yeah.
They are disastrous. So if this can survive Russia, I think Kansas will be okay. It's going to take off its jacket over in Kansas, even in the blizzard. Like, oh, this is nice. The wheat comes out in shorts during the blizzard. Like, it's so warm out here. Barbed wire. Barbed wire solves the problem of us not having what?
Fences.
Fences. Because, those cows that are roaming around, we want people to know their hours. And we don't want the cattle to roam around. So we would make sure that we build fences. So when the cow walks around, it pokes into the barbed wire. It's like, okay, I'm going to go this way. And it knows. Well, so we learn. But the most important thing to adapting to the West, irrigation. Irrigation. What's irrigation, folks? When we irrigate the West, what do we have to do? We have to bring water. So this includes dams, canals, rivers. I mean, folks, we sent out hundreds of engineers to build dams to literally reroute rivers. I mean, what Mother Nature did in thousands of years, we changed it to make sure that we can bring water to these areas. Without this, none of this would matter. Like, really, none of it would matter. So, I mean, irrigation by far, folks, the most important reason. Guys, Los Angeles would not exist without irrigation projects. Because where do we live, folks? We live in a desert. Guys, we live in a desert. Los Angeles is a desert. Where do we get our water from? The Owens Valley Lake, all the way up in Northern California. You guys ever drive up the I-5 and you see that large canal? Yeah, that's where all our water comes from the north. It goes all the way down the 5, and then we process it. We have to pump it up a hill, and then let it flow right back down afterwards. And the genius thing about that is that when we built that, we made sure that we built it on a grade where that water naturally flows downhill for like 400 miles until it hits that mountain, and then we have to pump it up before it goes back down the rest of the way. But we just found the perfect grade from Owens Valley, 300 miles away, all the way down to Los Angeles Basin. We found that perfect downhill slope where gravity takes that water all the way. It's pretty impressive. Very, very impressive. I think this year is like this 80th anniversary, 100th anniversary of the Owens Valley project. It's pretty impressive. So, anyway, there's that. All right. So let's talk about changes or changing in farms. Change in farms. Small farms. They're failing. So who's buying them up? The big farms. And these big farms are called what? Bonanza farms. Like plantations, which is big farms. And who's going to work on these big farms, you think? The failed small farmers. Anyway, so what ends up happening is that these small farms are bought up by the big farms, and you see the rise of bonanza farms. Like Kellogg cereal. Where do you think they all got that land from? This time period. Anyway, what ends up happening here is that these bonanza farms begin to emerge, and here's what happens. First off, these bonanza farms begin to focus on commercialized or commercial farming. Which means, what kind of farming are they not doing anymore?
The subsistence farming.
It's no longer subsistence farming. So if they're not subsistence farming, what are they growing then? What kind of food are they growing? What do we call that? They're growing cash crops. And specifically, what cash crops are they selling? It's not tobacco. What are they selling that the people still want? Wheat and corn. So all of a sudden, the crop that you used to sell for subsistence now becomes a cash crop. So is that a major change? Mm-hmm. So you have this commercialized farming now. This commercialized farming becomes even more profitable with the introduction of the mechanization of farming. Pretty much, what are we doing to farming? Yeah, we're industrializing farming. We're introducing machinery to farms. Remember the mechanical mower reaper? Mm-hmm. That one guy that would push that one blade and he would do the work of like 8 people? Mm-hmm. Now, you have this thing. And this thing has 8 mechanical mower reapers, which means one guy can do the job of 64. Can we grow and harvest a lot faster now? Mm-hmm. Most definitely. So you have the mechanization of farming, and because these machines can do the work of a lot of people, what happens to production? You have a massive increase in production. And what do these farmers hope? That with the increase in production, what's going to happen?
Good money.
They're going to make lots and lots of money. And are they going to try to grow as little as possible or as much as possible? As much as possible, because they want to make the most money possible. That brings us to the last part, though. 3. If every farmer is now producing a lot, what is going to happen? It is over speculation, but now that every farmer is producing a lot more than they used to, you're going to have a surplus. And why is it bad to have a surplus? What's going to happen then? The prices will fall. So, element 3, a surplus equals falling prices. Is that good or bad for farmers? Terrible for farmers. So that overproduction results in dropping prices. Another reason why prices are falling, folks, global competition. It's not just America growing wheat and corn anymore. They're competing with Canada, Russia, Argentina. So they're competing. In fact, here are some numbers. In 1867, the price of wheat was $2, and the price of corn was 78 cents. Okay? By 1889, because of overproduction and global competition, what's going to happen to wheat? It's going to fall in price. The wheat's going to hit 70 cents, and corn is going to reach 23 cents. Is that a huge drop? That's almost a 66% drop, folks. Huh?
Is it $2?
It's $2 dropping to 70 cents. Folks, that's if you made $100,000 a year prior, and then after global competition, you started making only $30,000 a year. Is that a big difference for you? Huge shift. And so these farmers are hurting a lot. And so, the causes again, we talked about falling prices, right? Falling prices was caused by what? Surplus and overproduction. We also talked about global competition. But the other major problem afflicting farmers are trusts. Now, which trusts are hurting farmers the most? Railroad trusts. So railroad trusts and pools, how are they screwing over farmers?
Taking your land?
Not taking their land. I'm a farmer. How am I going to make my living?
All you have to do is go on the street to sell it.
Yeah, I got to sell my goods, right? How am I going to sell my goods? Putting it on a train. And so what railroad trusts and pools did was they charged very high freight costs. What are freight costs? The shipping costs, right? So freight costs, shipping costs. I know you guys know what shipping costs are, so I'm just teaching you freight costs is another way of referring to shipping. You have increased freight costs. In fact, ridiculously high freight costs. Because if I'm the only railroad in the area and you want to sell your goods, I'm going to say, hey, it's going to be $1,000 to put your farm goods on my train. And you're going to be like, $1,000? That's way too much. At which point I'll say, oh, okay, well then you can just use one of the other trains. Oh, wait, there aren't any. $1,200. Keep complaining, we'll make it $1,500. Because I can do that. You need to make a living. I'm your only source to that. So I control everything. So one really brief line you should note. Farmers hate railroad trusts and pools. Because the next thing we're going to talk about is just this hated relationship that they have with each other. So farmers hate railroad trusts and pools. Ready? So, how do farmers fight back? Well, farmers fight back. And here's how they fight back. The farmers fight back by creating an organization called the National Grange Movement. The farmers fight back by creating something called the National Grange Movement, led by this guy, Oliver Hudson Kelley. So the National Grange Movement, led by Oliver Hudson Kelley. The National Grange Movement, Grange, Grange Movement, led by Oliver Hudson Kelley. Now, here's what they believed in. Number one, he wanted to educate farmers about overproduction because they were being stupid about that. Because if you're a farmer, what do you care about? Just making money, right? You want to make the most possible. But could that be bad over time? And you didn't know that. All you cared about was just making money. You didn't know that making money could lead to making no money. That doesn't make sense to you. So we had to educate farmers about overproduction. But we also had to educate farmers about railroad pools and trusts. So they also had to educate farmers about railroad pools and trusts. Here's a poster for them. Here they are farming. Pretty awesome. So one of the laws that they passed to try to fight back against railroads are the Granger Laws. Bam. And what the Granger Laws said was that states would regulate the railroads. The Granger Laws were intended to allow states to regulate railroads. Pools, rebates, kickbacks, all that stuff. Stock watering. But the Granger Laws were intended to have states regulate railroads. Now, wasn't there a Supreme Court case that talked about states being able to regulate? What Supreme Court case was it? Anyone know off the top of their head?
The one with the W in it.
Huh? Elena? Huh? Well, what are you saying? Josie? Munn v. Illinois is correct. So the Supreme Court case of Munn v. Illinois, the Supreme Court ruled again, states can regulate interstate commerce. Now, who can tell me the other Supreme Court case that overturned that later on? Wabash v. Illinois. Very good. So you have Munn v. Illinois overturned by Wabash v. Illinois. So just know those two Supreme Court cases. They're connected. Good so far? So again, the Granger Laws regulated railroads. Whoops. There's also the Farmers Alliance. They also tried to regulate railroads. That's all you have to know. They also tried to fight railroads by regulating them. Unfortunately, they did not include blacks. Were there a lot of black farmers?
Maybe.
The South. Sharecroppers. They count. So, they try to fight railroads, but unfortunately they did not include blacks, which means, are they going to lose a lot of potential supporters? They probably should have included them, but they didn't. Here's the philosophy, by the way, that they hold. Capitalism is held up by the rulers, who's held up by the religions that fool you, by the army that shoots at you, the army that eats for you, and the very bottom, you have the farmers that feed you, and the workers that work for you. Is a positive or negative portrayal of capitalism? Negative. So we're going to fight back, the farmers said. So they decided it's not enough to work at the states. We got to work at the federal level. We got to win a presidency. So they created the Populist Party, which we've talked about before. And the Populist Party, like we mentioned before, was a combination of farmers and labor unions. It was a combination of farmers and labor unions who felt ignored by the Democratic and Republican Party. It was a combination of farmers and labor unions who felt ignored by the Democratic and Republican Party. Jerks. Here's what they stood for. Here's their party platform. I'm going to go over these one at a time. Let me cross out some. You don't need to know that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. So start off with direct election of senators. Number 1. Direct election of senators meant that the people could elect their senators directly. The people could elect their senators directly. Because before, who elected senators? Anyone know? From each state, who would elect the senators from each state if not the people? The state governments. So again, in the direct election of senators, the people could elect their senators directly. And again, for your reference, just note that before it was state governments that selected U.S. senators. Good there? It pretty much just makes it more democratic. That's all you really need to know. Number 2, government ownership of railroads, telephone, and telegraph companies. Why do we want this? Why do we want the government to own railroads? How do we benefit if the government owns railroads? How do we benefit, folks? If the government owns railroads,
Oh, no more trust?
not just no more trust, but more directly, how do we benefit if the government controls railroads, telephones, telegraphs? Yeah. They would lower the costs. Cheaper. Prevent corruption. Eliminate monopolies, trusts. Because who would then control the trusts and monopolies? The government. Who controls the government? Who controls the government, folks? The people do. So we want the government to control railroads because that way the railroads can't screw us over because we control the government. Number 3, restriction of immigration. Why do we want to restrict immigration?
Overpopulated.
Job competition, population issues. In our workday, you guys know, right? Coining of silver. Why do we want the government to have more silver? So they can what? Why do we want the government to have more hard money in general, folks?
So we can pay more people.
Right, we want to be able to print more money. And why do we want to print more money? Because printing more money causes what?
Inflation.
We want to create inflation. And why do farmers like inflation? Because when we have inflation, what happens? Prices go up. Why do farmers like it when prices go up? They'll get paid more. So farmers like inflation. Who doesn't like inflation?
We don't.
Everyone else. If you're a producer, you like inflation. If you're a consumer, do you like inflation? No. So these are different parts of the country that demand. But If you're a worker, you like inflation because your wages go up. The problem is also the prices will go up too. So it just kind of depends. Lastly, graduated income tax. We talked about this before. What is a graduated income tax? What is an income tax? A tax on how much you make. So what is a graduated income tax? You get taxed more based on how much you make. The more you make, the more you pay. That's the income tax, graduated income tax. The more you make, the more you pay. Because they think that's fair, right? Right. So this is the Populist Party platform. You may see this document again soon. But if you look at it, they're demanding the free and unlimited coinage of silver and a graduated income tax. This is the political platform of who? The Populist Party. Just be aware of that. You just should know. Anyway, this new party emerges and they decide to run on the idea of coining of silver. Government-owned companies. Are they doing pretty well for themselves? Are they expanding in the West? So they are expanding. Which brings us to the election of 1896, which is the last thing we talked about in Section 1. So we're coming around full circle. In the election of 1896, two groups emerge. The Democrats and the Populists. These two parties believe in something called bimetallism. The idea behind bimetallism is that they support what? It's in the name.
Metal.
Yeah, but what about metal? It's called bimetallism.
You combine two metals?
They combine both metals. What metals are we talking about?
Silver.
They're pro-silver and gold. Because if you want inflation, are you supposed to take one metal out and replace it with another? No, you want as much metal as possible. They're bimetallists. On the other side are Republicans. They believe in what? Monometallism, which means they're in support of only what?
One metal. One.
Which one?
Gold? Silver? Iron?
Gold only. They were known as the gold bugs. Folks, here's why they wanted only gold. They don't want inflation. If you're rich, you don't want inflation. Here's why. Suppose I have $100, but you all have $1. I'm pretty rich, right? But suppose through inflation, all of a sudden I have $120, but you all now have $50. Is my money now worth less? It's because now everyone has a lot more money. I'm more wealthy when fewer people have money. Does that make sense? I like it when you have nothing and I have a lot. When you have a lot and I have a lot, that's not as good for me. So you have these two groups, the gold bugs and the silver bugs, fighting for gold and silver. Good so far? So I want you to look at this cartoon. Quietly look at this cartoon and tell me, is this a pro or anti-cartoon for bimetallism? So don't shout it out loud. Just think to yourself. Take a look. And I'll call on someone to tell me if they think this is a positive or negative cartoon looking at the bimetallist issue. About 15 more seconds. Who wants to raise their hand and tell me their thoughts about this cartoon? Well, folks, let's take a stab at it. Is this a positive or negative portrayal? Jackie?
Negative.
It's a negative. Why is it negative?
Because it looks like he's struggling to go on both of those wheels.
Right. Having two different wheels is making it difficult to ride this bike. That's the argument being made. So instead, what should we have?
One of the same.
Yeah, like the same wheels, like both gold wheels on the front. Actually, though, for this physics alone, if they just put the big wheel up front and a small wheel in the back, this bike would have been fine. Because you shouldn't ride a bike like this, you ride a bike like this, but it's not important. What about this cartoon? So we're going to take a minute to look at this one. Note this word on the bottom here. So, quietly to yourself, figure out if this cartoon is a positive or negative portrayal of silver. Okay, who wants to take a guess here as to whether or not they think this is a positive or negative portrayal of silver? Who wants to take a guess? Guesses are fine, folks. Anyone? No one wants to take a guess here? Okay, Amalia.
I think it's positive.
Why do you think it's positive?
Because like they have all these pieces for each of like the immigrants and stuff, and then they have like Democratic, which was they're for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's positive.
Okay, well, first off, let's look at this word here. Dubious. What does it mean? Like, that's very dubious. Like, doubtful. Very doubtful. Now, look at these wages. 20 cents a day. 2 cents a day. 15 cents a day. 10 cents a day. 25 cents a day. Are those good or bad wages?
Bad.
They're not very good wages. So the argument is suggesting if we adopt silver, this will not be as good as people are promising it to be. So it's dubious. Anyway, in the election of 1896, Republican William McKinley runs against Democratic and Populist candidate William Jennings Bryan because both the parties nominated him. So William Jennings Bryan is nominated by 2 parties. Well, Republicans have nominated only one guy. Who does it appear to have the advantage here? William Jennings Bryan, right? Seems to be a lot more popular. So you have Republican William McKinley and Democratic populist William Jennings Bryan, the battle of the Williams. In this election, between Republican William McKinley and Democrat and populist candidate William Jennings Bryan, William Jennings Bryan gives the very famous Cross of Gold speech. Again, this is by William Jennings Bryan. You should write this down. You should write down the quote that read, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." So write this quote down real quick by William Jennings Bryan. I want you to take a moment then, look at the cartoon, and look at the quote one more time. Talk with a partner briefly and tell me, is he saying that this cross of gold is a good thing or this cross of gold is a bad thing? So take a minute, write it down, briefly discuss with a partner. Is he saying that this cross of gold is a good thing or is he saying it's a bad thing? Based on the picture and the quote. So physically, turn to your partner. Take a guess. Talk about it. Think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Think about what imagery he's using. It is a cross, so think about that for a second.
Who's the guy in the background?
Anarchy.
Oh.
Okay, does anyone want to take a guess what they think about this speech here? Is this a positive or negative portrayal? Roger.
I think it's negative.
Why?
He's saying that if they use the gold thingy, then they're going to screw over the labor people.
Right, that we will crucify mankind. That mankind will be crucified like who? Jesus on this cross. And that's not good. So, cross of gold speech, gold is bad. It's bad for labor. He travels everywhere to campaign. There is a concern, though, that the Democratic Party is being taken over by the Populists. Because here's a populist farmer. Yeah, and this is supposed to be what? A donkey. A Democratic donkey. Democrats are represented by the donkey. Who represents the Republicans? Elephant. Anyway, here's another picture of the Democrats being taken over by the Populists.
Right. Yo, that looks weird.
A lot more extreme. Well, anyway, William McKinley's campaign was run by this guy. When William McKinley was president, his campaign was run by Mark Hanna. This was William McKinley's campaign strategist. The idea was called the Front Porch Campaign. And what happened was that William McKinley would just sit on his front porch, rocking in his chair, drinking tea, saying hi to guests and reporters, looking like what? Like a normal old guy, common man. While Mark Hanna would be behind the scenes, making sure that William McKinley looked like a common man, while talking to bankers and really running the campaign himself. Does that make sense? So he was the first modern campaign strategist. He's the first modern campaign strategist. The guy who really pulls the strings behind. So yeah, like Barack Obama makes all his speeches, or like he gives all the speeches. Do you think he writes all of those? No. Does he decide where he's going to go on his campaign trips? No, there's someone who's planned that all out, that we pay millions of dollars to plan a campaign like that. Oh yeah. Because he's also serving as president. He can't plan a campaign and run for office. He just says, I trust you to help me win this election. Tell me what to do. That's what this guy was. He's the first modern campaign strategist. Well, in this election, with this cross of gold being one of the major issues of the time, and people having a choice between the Republican Party, the builders of corporate wealth, the Democratic Party, the builders of saloons and jails, or the People's Party, the builders of churches and schools, in this election, who wins? William McKinley. And McKinley wins the election. Despite William Jennings Bryan winning more states in the South and the West, McKinley still wins. Why? He had more electoral votes. Here's why, folks. These states here alone equals New York.
Are you ready?
Yeah. All these states right here, New York cancels that out. So, it's not about winning the states, it's about winning the numbers, right? It's still about winning the electoral vote. And so, yeah, he was very popular in the western states and the southern states where there's tons of farmers, but does that matter? No. Interestingly enough, folks, there's a theory going around that this election actually had a book written about it, a very famous book. You might actually have seen the movie before. You might have even seen the musical. There is a theory that this election of 1896 was written about in allegorical form in the very famous book, The Wizard of Oz. Bear with me. So in The Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum, they talked about this yellow brick road.
Is that gold?
It's supposed to represent
Gold.
the gold standard. Now, in the book, not in the movie, but in the book, they talk about how the yellow brick road looks amazing from afar, and it looks like something that we've trusted for so long. But when you walk on the yellow brick road, you notice that many of the bricks are missing or cracked, and you know not how far this brick road will actually take you. This sense of hesitation of, is this brick road really as strong as we think it is? So that's the yellow brick road. Dorothy's shoes. Now, interestingly enough, folks, ruby red is not the color in the original Wizard of Oz. In fact, MGM only chose ruby red because when they were releasing the Wizard of Oz in movie theaters at the time, they were trying out a new technique called Technicolor. And so what better color to pop on the screen than ruby red? But in the book, it was originally silver. And in the book, Dorothy puts on the shoes and says, my goodness, these shoes are sturdy. They're tough and reliable. These are the type of shoes that I feel like can withstand anything and take me anywhere. Suggesting that the silver standard is pretty tough, pretty solid. Now, Dorothy, person that enters the Wizard of Oz not knowing, kind of the everyman, her color scheme is red, white, and blue. Dorothy represents the American people and Uncle Sam. We project ourselves onto Dorothy because we are unknowing, and we're learning about Oz for the first time ourselves. And as we meet these people, we will be given the choice of what to do next. Well, the Cowardly Lion. The Cowardly Lion who lacks bravery. The Cowardly Lion who's all talk but no bite. That Cowardly Lion is supposed to represent William Jennings Bryan. A man who runs and talks but can never win an election. If only had a little bit more bravery, he might win an election one day. Then there's the Tin Man. A man with no heart. Who does he represent? The factory workers. Working all day in monotonous lives, working and working but never doing anything new. Boring lives. If only they can find some passion in their work again, perhaps they too could find a heart. Then there's the Scarecrow. Who are they supposed to represent? Farmers. They need a brain. Because what are the farmers doing? They're overproducing. That's a problem. And so if only they had a brain, they wouldn't overproduce as much. Then the Wizard of Oz. You have the face, the Wizard of Oz that you know, the face that everyone knows is the wizard, and yet there's the man pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's William McKinley and Mark Hanna. You have the Wicked Witch of the East, crushed by Holmes. Banks. Crushed by overspeculation and collapses in housing markets. The Wicked Witch of the West, representing railroads. Railroad tycoons. And lastly, the Flying Monkeys. Weird, different, savage, Native Americans. In any case, folks, William McKinley wins the 25th election, or 25th presidency of the United States, serving from 1896 to 1901, which means how many years was he president? 5 years. Huh. Well, let's take one step back. What happened? First, he served 5 years, folks. So first off, in order for that to happen, he had to win re-election, and then what happened? He got himself killed. So again, William McKinley serves 5 years. Also, folks, this picture suggests what? The gold standard beat the silver standard. William McKinley will eventually be killed by a giant silver dollar with a broken sword stabbed in the back. Eventually, the Populist Party will die out, folks. So the last slide. Why did populism die? Last slide for Unit 6 and this semester. Number 1. The economy experienced rapid change. America was becoming more what at this time? Economically? Industrialized. So, while these farmers were fighting for their rights, was the economy moving in that direction? Not really. And so point 2 is that the era of small producers and farmers was fading away. So yeah, you can fight for populism, but unfortunately the economy is not moving in that direction. 3, race divided the Populist Party, which means who did they not include? Blacks. Racism, yo. 4, the Populists were not able to break existing party loyalties. People were already loyal to who? Who were they already loyal to? Who were the existing parties? Democrats and Republicans. And so are you going to willingly break your ties with the Republican or Democratic Party for this new party that has just emerged? No. Why should I join you? What do you have to offer? So we were suspicious. And lastly, most of their agenda was taken over by the Democratic Party. What does that mean? That most of their agenda was taken over by the Democratic Party.
The Democrats were taking over their plans and stuff.
Yeah. What the Populist Party stood for, what did the Democratic Party do? Yeah, they said, we'll do that. Oh, you want to have unlimited coinage of silver? We'll be the party of unlimited coinage of silver, which means, what don't you need? You don't need the Populist Party anymore. And so the Democratic Party took over their agenda, and there was no need for a Populist Party anymore. Questions or comments? None? And that is the end of Unit 6 and Semester 1.